Hello, and welcome to another edition of Movies Are Boring, the web show in which two defense journalists sit and talk about pop culture and the movies. My name is Matthew Gault. With me, as always, is my co-host, the man, the myth, the beard, Kevin Knodell. How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing all right today, Matt.
Good. I'm so glad that you're doing all right. So, there's a crisp in the air. It's cold outside. People are drinking their pumpkin spice lattes and gearing up for costumes and trick-or-treating. So we thought we should take a look at horror movies, but specifically, obviously, because of the nature of our show, military horror films. And Kevin, you suggested Dog Soldiers, which is what we're going to talk about this week. Dog Soldiers is the 2002 horror movie directed by Neil Marshall. If you don't know who Neil Marshall is, he directed all of your favorite episodes of Game of Thrones. Kevin, why did you pick Dog Soldiers for us?
Well, we had this conversation about doing military horror, and that's just one that kind of stuck it out in my head. It's a British military horror film. There's a shortage of British military movies in general, particularly in depicting the modern British military. So this one's a little unique in that, and as a result, it also has kind of a cult following within the British military as being one of the few depictions of modern British soldiers. Not necessarily accurate; it's super campy, but it is different in that sort of vein of things.
Okay, so the movie is essentially about a squad of the British Army. And correct me if I screw anything up here, Kevin. British Army. They go into the woods. They're told they're on a training exercise, that they're going to be essentially training with an SAS unit. It turns out that instead they are bait for werewolves, so that the British Army can capture a werewolf and try to weaponize it. So everything goes to hell very quickly, and then you end up with the classic setup of a group of people stuck in a cabin in the woods defending against the horrors outside. The catch this time being that the guys that are stuck in the cabin have military training and lots of weapons, and the monster outside that's trying to get them is a pack of werewolves who just want to eat. Kevin, you were saying that this is kind of one of the only films that depicts modern British. Oh Lord, that is a horrifying light. Do you see that?
I do.
I'm gonna try to take care of that real quick. I apologize.
Reboot back there.
Yeah, hold on a second.
Lens flares. Nothing you're doing is helping. The sun gods are just...
That's better though, right? Like,
it's a little better.
It's a little better.
Yeah.
Okay. So, anyway, this is one of the only depictions of the modern British Army in film.
Well, there have been a few others lately, but it just doesn't happen that much. Most of the movies that depict the British military depict them in World War I or World War II era. There's not a lot of movies that really tackle British military culture since then. And this one was kind of unique in that at the time that it was made, at least, since they've been embroiled in this decade of war with us.
Right.
There's been renewed interest, obviously. But yeah, at the time that this was made, and I've talked to some British soldiers about this particular film before, it is unique in that way, and it is just kind of a fun little movie. It's also unique in that a lot of times, if somebody does tackle a more modern take on the British military, it's often something like Northern Ireland.
Right.
It's often very critical, which isn't a terrible thing for movies and pop culture to be critical of things and to dissect things. But I think for a lot of British soldiers, when this movie came out, it was refreshing to be depicted in a way that wasn't overbearingly negative.
Well,
You
they
know,
were heroes. I mean,
right?
the basic soldiers are the enlisted guys are all they're all heroes in this. They just want to go home. They just want to get this exercise over with, or later in the movie, kill these werewolves and then go home and watch football.
Yeah.
They're just normal people. I did think it was interesting though that the British Special Forces are the bad guys, kind of, right, and the British government. So it's still critical in that way, and there's the tension between Special Forces and the enlisted guys. If any of the British soldiers you've talked to brought that up at all, or
No, not really. That's just. I mean, I think that really is just for dramatic purposes. And it's a trope,
Mhm.
black ops soldiers involved in really shady stuff. So it's just a trope. It's at the end of the day, this is a movie that you don't want to think too much about because it
No,
is.
it's really not.
At the end of the day, it really is about guys with guns fighting werewolves in a valiant last stand, and also with swords and all kinds of cool weapons.
Well, they have to, they use what they've got in the cabin that they're stuck in, which after they run out of ammunition, because werewolves are essentially immortal and impossible to kill, yes, that turns into gas canisters and old bladed weapons that happen to be there, because I guess there's old bladed weapons in every home in the Scottish Highlands. That makes sense.
Well, if Braveheart's to be believed.
I think I got about halfway through the movie and I was thinking about it way too hard, and I kept there's a lot of I was actually really excited about this film because I really like Neil Marshall. Um, if you guys don't know, Neil Marshall directed the Game of Thrones fans out there. He directed the Battle of the Blackwater, which I believe is the season 2 finale episode, and he directed the most recent season finale episode where there's the two big, huge battle episodes that are just a giant war. They're very well directed and very well done. And he also directed a horror movie that I'm quite fond of called The Descent in the mid-aughts. Is after Dog Soldiers, and I'd never seen Dog Soldiers. My expectations were high, and it took me about halfway through the movie to realize that I just needed to calm down and enjoy the werewolf ride and not think about things so much.
I mean, it's not. I mean, there are things that are fun to observe and pick apart in this movie because it's. I mean, it is a dumb action movie, but it is interesting to see the dynamic between the characters. Some of the twists don't make 100% sense, but they're there.
Are you talking about the twist with the girl at the end?
I am. That didn't make a lot of sense, but
Didn't at all.
but it's there. I mean, that's a thing.
What we're talking about is, 'cause we like to spoil movies for people on this broadcast. When after basically the initial werewolf attack, and the soldiers are running through the woods, firing their guns behind them, trying to get away from horrifying monsters. They run into a woman in a car, and she piles them all in the car, and werewolves are smashing into it, trying to get in, and they drive off. And she's just very nonchalant about the whole thing, and it's just kind of like, so what are you guys doing? What's going on? Well, there's a house up here, and she's with them the whole time. And you kind of start learning a little bit more about her, and you could kind of tell that she knows a little bit what's going on. And at the end, it turns out she's a werewolf, and she was the whole time. And that she was going to have some sort of romantic interest with kind of the main character, whose name is Cooper. That turns out to be completely false, kind of, for no reason. It was very odd. It was a very odd twist, right? Kind of out of nowhere and didn't. But this is a kind of movie filled with odd twists out of nowhere that you just kind of have to roll with.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought was interesting was that I feel like this subverts the. There's a tendency in these movies to always kind of have like a B romance plot going on, right? So there's always like the hero, there's always a girl that the hero is supposed to hook up with, and they're supposed to kind of survive together, and he's supposed to get her out of there, kind of, right?
Hmm.
So this, it turns out that the female lead was a monster the whole time. There's even some like really bad um, kind of misogynist jokes there thrown in the end at that moment, and then you kind of realize that um, the B love story in this movie is almost more between his sergeant and him, right? Because and you kind of like the Cooper is kind of the I wouldn't kind of de facto second in command of this unit. And their sergeant, who's played by John Pertwee, who's a son of one of the third Doctor Who, because I know too much about nerd stuff. Um,
He is also Alfred on Gotham.
oh, he is. Okay, so the guy that's playing Alfred on Gotham, yeah, he is the sergeant in charge, gets wounded early, and his second in command, Cooper, who's played by
Kevin McKidd.
Kevin McKidd, who people will remember as Lucius Vorenus from the HBO show Rome, starts taking care of him, and then at the end, it's after the girl kind of goes away, like the sergeant kills her, shoots her in the head, is recovering from his wounds, and I don't know, there was a couple moments there at the end between them. There's a lot of like it was like very brotherly comrade, brothers in arms kind of thing. But I felt like that was an interesting take on that.
Well, yeah, they take that dynamic and replace it with the military dynamic, with the closeness of this group of soldiers in a horror situation, which in some ways is kind of what any war really is, a horror situation where everybody's where everybody's just sticking together.
That kind of, that makes me. Why do you think there's not more horror movies in this kind of in a military setting? Do you think it's because war is horror enough?
Well, no, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, this was just picking one, but there are a lot of different, like this is a genre in and of itself, which is soldiers versus monster. They're typically B movies,
Right.
but this one's a little unique in that it's a British one, but
But I
this
also feel there's
exists.
often like a civilian that ends up being kind of the de facto leader of the soldiers, and they're untrustworthy of the soldiers initially. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not.
That actually does happen on a lot of these.
There's not a lot of like pure military horror films like The Bunker. I know that we've talked about, and this, um, and that's. I think that they're, and I think it's because that war is horrifying in and of itself. You don't need to add ghosts and goblins. Like I think, have you seen Fury yet?
No, but I did read your review, of course.
It was that I stand. I think that's a kind of a horror movie, and it is horrifying depiction of war. Um, and when you've got guys dressed in black cloaks with skulls on their caps, committing genocide, maybe you don't need to add zombies to that. Perhaps that the reality is terrifying enough.
But I
Uh,
think, but I think, um, like using horror to approach war stuff sometimes is like a way of confronting it and making it almost less scary.
I agree. I think that's a good way to talk about these kinds of things. I find it interesting that I feel it hasn't been done more, and hope maybe somebody will watch this and totally call me on it. And that'd be cool. We get a big list of movies that I've never heard of.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, a lot more of the movies are. There's certainly more psychological horror movies than creature features,
like Jacob's Ladder.
huh?
Like Jacob's Ladder.
Like Jacob's Ladder, and like oh yeah, like a whole number of those. And there's one that I recently saw something on that I want to talk to you about later, because I also need to track down the title on Google and figure out what it was actually called.
Okay.
Uh, but it's one that I'm actually potentially interested in us looking at.
Okay. Um, to do a tangent topic real quick.
Sure.
There's it struck me that the super glue. Do you remember that scene? They patch up. The sergeant gets wounded. His guts are literally coming out of his stomach, and they
Yes.
do like an impromptu surgery, and they use super glue to seal the wound.
Mhm.
And they said that that super glue was invented in Vietnam to patch up soldiers. Do you know anything about that? How true
I
is
don't
that
know if that's
statement?
I don't know if that's true. I know somebody who has done that before, though.
Oh, really? What's
Yes.
what's what's the story there?
I don't remember all the details, but she did use. I mean, it wasn't as intense as intestines falling out, but she did use super glue to close a gaping wound. Um, Before she went to the. She also she hates doctors and likes to fix things herself. But yes, I do know of at least one case of somebody using super glue to close a wound.
Okay.
I do not recommend that though.
Yeah, just you would think just go to the doctor, right? Don't use the. But maybe you've got super glue.
Healthcare is expensive in this country. That is why.
Yeah, that's you make an excellent point. Unfortunately,
I
um,
mean, maybe this is relevant to the story. She's Mexican, also.
ah, gotcha.
If that helps paint the picture.
I understand a little bit better now. Um, so did you catch all the nerd references in this movie? Because there's a lot of like deep nerd references.
There are.
Um, when they kind of figure out that they discover that the SAS soldiers have all been killed, and they figure out that this training exercise has gone awry. They figure out that their communication equipment is bugged and jammed. One guy calls it the Kobayashi Maru test, um, which is a Star Trek reference, which you have to be. I think you have to be kind of a deep Star Trek nerd to know what the Kobayashi Maru is, right?
I don't. Well, because it was. He goes through the Kobayashi Maru in the remake.
Oh, he does, doesn't he? Okay. That
Uh,
was
I mean, for people to actually remember what it is and know what it is in context, yeah, that is kind of a specific reference. Because I think for most people who watched the Star Trek remake, that was that thing he did.
yeah. That's basically the way in deep nerd Star Trek lore, the way Kirk gets a big reputation early on. So they have this test called the Kobayashi Maru that's supposed to teach you how to accept failure and loss. And Kirk totally cheats and beats it because he's Kirk and he's the best captain. That's not true.
And he doesn't lose.
No, he does not accept failure well. The other reference that I caught that I thought was interesting was to I believe it's the Battle of Rourke. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Which is another specific reference.
Would you enlighten us to the specific reference? What happens is in the movie when they're all stuck in the cabin initially, and they realize they're kind of boarding it up and they're going to be defending this small position with a small group. One of the guys references a famous British battle, the Battle of Rourke, which I'm going to kick over to Kevin now.
I don't know it well enough to explain it, but they go through a lot of history and a lot of like this isn't as dumb as this movie is. It's not a movie for stupid people.
Yeah, it's really weird. A lot of the dialogue is very quick, and it's packed full of like historical references and nerd references.
Mm-hmm.
The Rourke's, he was talking about the Battle of Rourke's Drift, which was hopefully I won't mess this up too bad. It was the defense of the mission station of Rourke's Drift under the command of Lieutenant John Chard of the Royal Engineers, and it was immediately followed the British Army's defeat at the Battle of something in the late 1800s when they were fighting the Zulu tribes in Africa, and it was just like a very specific reference of a bunch of guys kind of with their backs against the wall, about to be slaughtered horribly by Zulu warriors. think they had 150 British and colonial troops were up against something like 4,000 Zulu soldiers. So again, yeah, like a weird British historical reference that not many people are going to catch, and it happened very quickly. And that was like I ended up enjoying a lot of the dialogue in this because it was very fast, and these British guys the accents they let them all hang out. I guess is the best way I can think of to put it.
Well, because it was made for a British audience.
Mm-hmm. When it aired in America, it aired in theaters in Britain. But when it aired here in America, it was like it was on the Sci-Fi Channel, right? Heavily edited, trimmed down, and thrown up on the Sci-Fi Channel on like a Saturday night or something. As one of their sci-fi movies. It'd be the equivalent of like watching a Sharknado or something now. But it got a huge following. One of the other things that I thought was interesting was that I kept waiting for. And again, I don't know when they were making this movie, but I kept waiting for like a reference to the War on Terror, or the wars in Afghanistan, or it's anything like that. And there's just nothing.
Yeah, well, because I think this was made like 2000, 2001.
Yeah, so like it was released right after September 11th, right?
Yeah, something. I'd have to go back and see exactly when it was released, but no, that wasn't really a factor in this. This was a peacetime military, at least at the time that it was made. Though I think I did like their little flashback reference to the Gulf War, which again is, and that was interesting to me also because people often think about the Gulf War just in context of American tanks and planes and all that kind of shit. And they don't remember it as being a large coalition war. And the British were heavily involved in the Gulf War as well. And I thought it was interesting to see them talk about the legacy of the Gulf War the way that they did.
Yeah, the sergeant says that he was part of a crew that was going in to mop up the last pockets of resistance, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how accurate that is to how what the British actually did during the Gulf War?
No, not really. I mean, they did do that along with the Americans. I mean, they were involved in the war every step of the way, just like we were, obviously.
Right.
But they definitely had infantry operations and armored operations, and it's very conceivable that they could have been conducting some of those operations near the end of the war before Saddam decided to say, hey, no, we're done.
Did you notice that Kevin McKidd shook during a lot of the film? There's like a couple references to it. It was like almost the Saving Private Ryan Tom Hanks thing. It was only played like 2 or 3 times. It was the reason like he couldn't operate on the sergeant because he was shaking. And then later in the movie, before one of the battles, he's shaking as well.
I didn't notice that actually. I've seen this movie like probably 3 or 4 times, and I don't think I've ever noticed that.
Huh. It was that kind of struck me because it was like one of the only serious kind of plays. Obviously, what you were talking about when the sergeant's talking about his experiences in the Gulf War was kind of a serious moment, and then Kevin McKidd also, who plays Cooper when he's shaking, is kind of the other serious moments in the film. Super uneven movie, but a lot of fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sir, do you have anything else that you would like to add about Dog Soldiers?
Not really, no.
All right. Well, gentlemen and ladies out there who are watching us, thank you so much for joining us for Movies Are Boring Dog Soldiers. We will be back next week with another horror movie with a military theme. So watch for that. Thank you so much.